If you translate what he said, I'll give my job to your mother. Ricardo Montero laughed loudly, pointing at Carmen as she served coffee in the elegant meeting room of the Thompson mansion. The Chinese businessman Chinny had just spoken for 5 minutes straight in Mandarin, gesturing with growing frustration, and no one in the room understood a single word. The luxurious room, with its panoramic view of the Beverly Hills Gardens, witnessed yet another business morning that was rapidly falling apart. William Thompson, a real estate mogul, sweated coldly as he watched his biggest international contract slip through his fingers. The interpreter had cancelled at the last minute, leaving everyone in an awkward situation in front of the Chinese billionaire. Carmen Silva, 48 years old, a maid who had worked in that mansion for 7 years, lowered her eyes and continued serving coffee the way she always did, invisible. But outside the room, leaning against the wall in the hallway, her daughter Leticia listened to every word of that public humiliation. The 22-year-old had arrived early from college and was witnessing, once again, her mother being treated as an object of amusement. Ricardo, the vice president of Thompson Enterprises, loved moments like this. It was his specialty to turn tension into comedy at the expense of those he considered inferior. "Go on, Carmen," he insisted with that cruel smile she knew so well. "I bet you understand everything, mister," Chinny said. "A hard-working woman like you must have learned Chinese washing dishes, right?" Laughter echoed through the room. Even William laughed nervously, desperate to break the tension that was costing him millions. Chinny, however, did not find it funny at all. His dark eyes showed growing irritation at this lack of professionalism and obvious disrespect. Carmen kept her composure, as always. 30 years of working in family homes had taught her that reacting only made things worse. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ricardo," she murmured. "I don't understand any of this." "Of course you don't." Ricardo slammed his fist on the table, amused. "But how about we make an interesting bet, William? If your maid can translate what our Chinese friend said, I'll give her my job right here and now. How about it?" The room exploded with laughter. The idea was so absurd that even the security guards smiled discreetly. Carmen Silva, a black woman without a college degree, competing for the position of vice president against a Harvard-educated executive. The very concept was hilarious to those men in their tailored suits. Leticia, outside in the hallway, clenched her fists, but something in her eyes was not ordinary anger. It was the dangerous serenity of someone who keeps powerful secrets. She took a deep breath, adjusted her university backpack, and took a step toward the door. What Ricardo Montero did not know was that this young maid's daughter had spent the last 4 years studying international relations with a specialization in the Asian market. And what none of them could have imagined was that she had been speaking Mandarin for 7 years. Ever since she secretly decided that one day she would transform her mother's life. While everyone laughed at the joke about Carmen translating Chinese, Leticia smiled slightly. They had no idea what was about to happen. The humiliation did not stop there. Ricardo was having too much fun to let this golden opportunity pass him by. "You know what, William?" he continued, rising from his Italian leather chair. "Let's make this even more interesting. If your little maid can translate a single sentence of what our Chinese friend said, I'll not only give her my job, but I'll also pay for her daughter's college education." The laughter intensified. The idea of Carmen Silva, a black woman of humble origins, holding an executive position in a multi-million-dollar company was so absurd that even Chinny, despite not fully understanding Portuguese, picked up on the mocking tone and frowned even more. William Thompson, desperate to save the deal, motioned for Carmen to come closer. "Come here, Carmen. Let's end this joke." His voice carried that familiar condescension of someone who treats employees as entertainment for guests. Carmen walked to the center of the room, carrying the empty tray, feeling the weight of all those eyes on her. 7 years working in that house, 7 years of being invisible, and now she was being turned into a spectacle. "Mr. William, I really don't understand Chinese," she murmured, trying to maintain her dignity. "Of course you don't." Ricardo clapped his hands as if applauding a comedy routine. "But how about trying anyway? Go on, say anything in Chinese. I bet Mr. Chinny will love to hear your interpretation." From the hallway, Leticia watched every second of that humiliation. Her hands trembled, not from nervousness, but from a controlled rage that had been building for years. She remembered perfectly the day she decided to study Mandarin 3 years ago, when she heard Ricardo commenting to William about how these people never make an effort to grow in life. At that time, Leticia had just secured a partial scholarship for international relations and was working overnight shifts at a bakery to pay the rest of her tuition. When she learned that Thompson's company was expanding into the Asian market, she made a decision that would change everything. She would become fluent in Mandarin, and one day she would prove that competence has no color or surname. It took 3 years of waking up at 4 in the morning to study before work. 3 years of watching free video lessons on YouTube, downloading apps, and practicing pronunciation alone in the mirror. 3 years of dreaming of the day when she could give her mother the life she deserved, far from that mansion where she was treated like furniture. "What are you waiting for, Carmen?" Ricardo insisted, now clearly irritated by her hesitation. "Or are you going to admit that you're just another unqualified maid who will never leave the place where she was born?" The phrase cut through the air like a blade. Chinny, who understood more Portuguese than he let on, felt his blood boil. In Chinese culture, publicly disrespecting someone, especially an older person, was one of the greatest offenses possible. Carmen lowered her eyes, but not out of shame. It was the same strategy she had used for decades to survive in hostile environments, to make herself small so the predators would lose interest. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ricardo. You're right. Of course I'm right." Ricardo was elated now, feeling like the center of attention. "That's the difference between us and you. We prepare ourselves. We study. We get qualified. You just wait for opportunities to fall from the sky." Leticia clenched her fists. Every word was a personal affront, not only to her mother, but to everyone who worked through the night to study, who woke up before sunrise to turn impossible dreams into reality. Ricardo had no idea that he was talking to one of those people. William, realizing that the situation was becoming too awkward, even by his standards, tried to intervene. "Ricardo, I think that's enough. Let's focus on business." "Business?" Ricardo laughed loudly. "What business, William? Our interpreter has abandoned us. Our client is clearly angry. And you want to do business. The only person in this room who at least tried to communicate with him was your maid. And look what happened." Chinny had reached the limit of his patience. He stood up abruptly from his chair and spoke in Mandarin for almost 2 minutes, his voice heavy with indignation and disappointment. He gestured toward Ricardo, then pointed at Carmen, clearly expressing his outrage at the situation. "There you go," Ricardo shouted, as if he had just proven his point. "He's obviously furious at our lack of professionalism. Congratulations, William. You just lost the biggest contract of your career by trusting amateurs." But Leticia, from the hallway, had understood every word Chinny said. The businessman was not just angry about the lack of an interpreter. He was genuinely shocked by Ricardo's disrespect, comparing him to small men who build their egos by stepping on others, and saying he would never do business with people who treat employees as objects of amusement. Chinny had also mentioned that he grew up poor in Shanghai, that his own mother worked as a maid to pay for his education, and that he recognized in Carmen the same quiet dignity that his mother had maintained in the face of adversity. Finally, he had said something that made Letitia's heart race. He said that he would cancel all business with that company unless someone there showed the slightest bit of respect and professional competence in the next 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That was all Leticia had. She took a deep breath, adjusted her university backpack, and took a determined step toward the door. 7 years of humiliation, 3 years of secret preparation, and now 5 minutes to change her mother's life forever. What Ricardo Montero did not know was that he had underestimated not only Carmen, but an entire family that turned obstacles into steps on a ladder that would take them much higher than those men in suits could ever imagine. Every insult had been fuel, every laugh had been motivation, and now it was time to cash in. Leticia adjusted her university backpack and took a deep breath. 5 minutes. That was all Chinny had given that company before definitively canceling the multi-million-dollar contract. 5 minutes that would determine not only the future of Thompson Enterprises, but also whether years of secret preparation would finally bear fruit. She had spent the last 3 years not only studying Mandarin, but also immersing herself in Chinese business culture, negotiation protocols, and the cultural nuances that made the difference between a successful deal and a total failure. Every morning, She woke up at 4 in the morning to study before her shift at the bakery. Every weekend she spent at the university library devouring articles on the Asian market. She saved every penny to buy books on international business. What motivated her was not only the dream of a better life, but the painful memory of every humiliation her mother had suffered in that house. Like when Isabella, William's teenage daughter, had deliberately thrown orange juice on the clean floor and said, "Oops, your mother will have to clean it again." Or when Ricardo had commented in front of Carmen, "At least she knows her place. She doesn't dream of impossible things." Each cruel comment had fueled the plan that Leticia was meticulously constructing. She knew that one day she would have the opportunity to show that competence and intelligence have no color, no social class, and no surname. And that day had come sooner than she expected. From the hallway, she heard Ricardo intensify the humiliation. "You know, William, I think we should hire more maids like Carmen. At least they know they shouldn't have dreams above their station. They don't think they're capable of things they weren't born to do." Chinny spoke again in Mandarin, his voice loaded with growing indignation. "This man is a disgrace to any serious company. How can I entrust my investments to people who treat employees as objects of amusement?" he said in Mandarin, gesturing impatiently. Leticia knew she needed a strategic entrance. She couldn't just burst into the room like a desperate student. She needed instant credibility. That's when she noticed something that changed everything. On the side table near the door was Chinny's document folder, open, displaying contracts in both traditional and simplified Mandarin. She approached discreetly and quickly photographed 2 pages with her cell phone. In seconds, she had formulated a perfect strategy. She knocked gently on the conference room door. "Excuse me," she said, entering with a professional demeanor. "I'm Leticia Silva from UCLA's International Relations Consulting Firm. I'm here to solve the communication problem you're facing." The entire room turned to look at her. Ricardo frowned, confused. William blinked several times, trying to process the information. Carmen's eyes widened, recognizing her own daughter, but not understanding what was happening. "Excuse me, but who called you?" Ricardo asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "And more importantly, who said we need consulting from a young black woman?" "Interesting that this is your first concern, Mr. Ricardo," Leticia finished with a serene smile. "But let me explain why I am here." She addressed Chinny directly and said in perfect Mandarin, "Mr. Chinny, I apologize for the disrespectful environment you are facing. I have come to offer my professional translation services so that we can resolve the situation appropriately." Chinny stood up immediately, his eyes lighting up with relief and surprise. "Finally, someone who speaks my language correctly," he replied in Mandarin. "Where are you from? Your pronunciation is exceptional." "I'm from Los Angeles, Mr. Chinny, but I've studied Mandarin intensively over the past few years, specializing in Sino-American business negotiations," Leticia replied in fluent Mandarin. Ricardo was speechless. William tried to understand how a young black woman had appeared out of nowhere speaking fluent Chinese, and Carmen watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern, fearing that Leticia might lose everything by exposing herself in this way. "Wait a moment," Ricardo stood up, pointing at Leticia. "Aren't you the maid's daughter? What the hell is going on here?" Chinny, who had understood the question in English, looked from Leticia to Carmen, then back to Leticia. "Is this your mother?" he asked in Mandarin. "Yes, Mr. Chinny, and that's exactly why I'm here. I heard the words you said earlier about respect, dignity, and professionalism. I came to offer the bridge of communication that this company clearly needs." Chinny smiled for the first time since he had entered that mansion. "Interesting. Very interesting. And tell me, young lady, did you hear everything I said earlier?" "Every word, Mr. Chinny, and I can assure you that you'll be satisfied with the solution I propose." That's when Ricardo exploded. "This is ridiculous. You can't just show up here and interrupt our business. You're a maid's daughter, not an international consultant." Leticia turned to him with that dangerous serenity she had been perfecting for years. "Mr. Ricardo, you made a bet a few minutes ago. You said you would give your job to whoever could translate what Mr. Chinny said. I'm here to accept that bet. But you're not the maid. The bet was with your mother." "The bet," Leticia said, taking her cell phone out of her pocket and showing a recording, "was exactly this." She pressed play. Ricardo's voice filled the room. If anyone can translate what our Chinese friend said, I'll give up my job. Your own words, Mr. Ricardo, she said, and I have witnesses. Chinny watched everything with growing interest. Not only did this young woman speak his language perfectly, but she also displayed an impressive strategic intelligence. William Thompson, realizing that the situation had completely spiraled out of his control, tried to intervene. Leticia, right, maybe we can talk about this in private. There is nothing to discuss in private, Mr. Thompson, Leticia replied firmly. A bet was made publicly. Mr. Chinny was publicly disrespected, and my mother was publicly humiliated. The resolution will also be public. Ricardo was red with anger. This is absurd. You are a student. You can't just. I can't what, Mr. Ricardo? I can't be competent. I can't speak languages. I can't have ambitions beyond those you deem appropriate for my color and social class. The room was completely silent. Chinny watched every word, every gesture, seeing exactly the kind of intelligence and dignity he respected in the business world. That's when something unexpected happened. From a folder that Leticia had discreetly observed, she took out a sheet of paper and showed it to Chinny. Mr. Chinny, I believe there is an error in the investment calculations on page 23 of your contract. The figures in yuan do not exactly match the conversion to dollars as presented. Chinny took the document, examined it quickly, and his eyes widened. You're right. How did you see that? Because I studied not only your language, Mr. Chinny, but also your market. I know that details like this may seem small, but for Chinese businesspeople, accuracy is fundamental. At that moment, everyone in the room realized that they were no longer dealing with a simple student taking advantage of an opportunity. They were dealing with someone who had meticulously prepared for this moment, someone who had turned years of humiliation into fuel for impressive competence. Ricardo felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. William Thompson realized that everything was changing rapidly, and Carmen, for the first time in 7 years in that house, felt a pride that warmed her chest like fire. But what none of them knew yet was that Leticia had saved the best revelation for last. What she was about to show would not only save the contract, but completely rewrite the rules of that game. Every second of preparation, every early morning of study, every silent humiliation had been a step building the staircase to this exact moment, where underestimation would become the greatest weapon against those who believe that power comes from birth, not merit. Leticia took a deep breath and looked directly at Chinny. Mr. Chinny, you said exactly this 15 minutes ago, and then, in perfect Mandarin, she began to translate word for word everything the businessman had said. You said you were deeply disappointed with the lack of professionalism at this company, that you expected to find serious partners, but instead found an environment where employees are publicly humiliated for the entertainment of incompetent executives. Ricardo felt the blood freeze in his veins. Chinny nodded vigorously, confirming every word. Leticia continued relentlessly. You mentioned that you grew up poor in Shanghai, that your mother worked as a maid to pay for your education, and that you would never do business with people who treat workers as objects of amusement. William Thompson was pale. Each revelation was a bomb exploding within his plans for international expansion. But the most important part, Leticia continued, was when you said you would cancel all business with this company unless someone demonstrated real competence in the next 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes ended exactly 2 minutes ago. The room was deathly silent. Ricardo desperately tried to intervene. That's impossible. She can't just. Can't what? Chinny stood up, speaking in slow but firm English. She translated everything perfectly, every word. How do you explain that, Mr. Ricardo? That's when Leticia took her cell phone out of her pocket. Mr. Chinny, may I show you something that I believe will be of interest to you? She showed him the screen. It was a simultaneous translation app that she had developed as her final university project, specifically designed for Sino-American negotiations. Chinny's eyes widened. You created this? Yes, sir. It's my final project for my degree in international relations. The app identifies not only words but also cultural nuances and specific negotiation protocols between Chinese and American companies. Ricardo was falling apart. William, you can't seriously be considering. Considering what, Ricardo? William turned to him with a restrained fury he had never shown before. Considering that a 22-year-old woman saved a contract that you almost completely destroyed. Considering that she demonstrated more competence in 10 minutes than you have in 8 years. Chinny took Letitia's cell phone and examined the app. How many people have access to this? For now, only me, Mr. Chinny. But I can license it to companies that truly value intercultural communication. And how much do you want for an exclusive license? Leticia smiled. It depends on the package, Mr. Chinny. An exclusive license for your business group would be $500,000. Personal consulting for expansion into the American market would be another $300,000 per year. And if you include cultural protocol management for all your investments in the Americas, she paused deliberately, $1 million annually. The entire room was speechless. Chinny smiled for the first time since entering that mansion. It's a deal. Ricardo slumped into his chair as if he had been punched. $1 million. She's asking for $1 million. And I'm paying, Chinny replied dryly. Because real competence is worth every penny. He turned to William. Mr. Thompson, I have a proposal. Keep the original contract, with one condition. This young lady will be my official representative in all dealings with your company. William looked at Leticia, then at Ricardo, who was sweating as if he were in a sauna. What about the position that was promised? About that. Leticia opened the folder she had brought with her. I have here the complete recording of the bet made by Mr. Ricardo. She pressed play on her cell phone. Ricardo's voice echoed through the room. If anyone can translate what our Chinese friend said, I'll give up my position. I bet she understands everything, Mr. Chinny said. Your own words, Mr. Ricardo, Leticia said calmly. Witnessed by everyone in this room. Ricardo exploded. This is ridiculous. You can't just record a private conversation. Private. Leticia raised an eyebrow. A business meeting at a company with multiple witnesses. Mr. Ricardo, perhaps you should review your basic legal concepts. Chinny watched everything with growing admiration. Not only did this young woman speak his language and understand his culture, but she also demonstrated impressive strategic intelligence. William, Chinny said firmly, I only do business with people of integrity. This man, he pointed to Ricardo, lied about having an interpreter, disrespected employees in my presence, and now tries to go back on a publicly made promise. How can I entrust my company to an organization that tolerates this? William Thompson was at a crossroads. Losing Chinny meant losing $200 million in future contracts. Keeping Ricardo meant losing credibility with the most important partner in the company's history. Ricardo, William said slowly, you're fired. The silence that followed was deafening. Ricardo staggered. William, you can't. 8 years working together. I built half of this company's contracts. You almost destroyed the biggest contract in our history, William replied coldly. And worse, you did it by humiliating an employee in front of an international client. Carmen, who had watched everything in silence, finally spoke up. Mr. William, I can't accept Mr. Ricardo's position. I'm not qualified for it. Leticia turned to her mother with a proud smile. Mom, who said the position would be yours? She looked at William. The bet was that if someone translated, that person would get the position. I translated. The position is mine. Chinny clapped slowly. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Ricardo was red with anger and despair. You can't do that. I have rights. I have a contract. Had. William corrected. As for your rights, consult your lawyer. I'm sure he'll explain how public verbal bets can have legal consequences. Leticia walked over to Ricardo and held out her hand. Mr. Ricardo, your office keys, please, and your access card. Ricardo stared at that outstretched hand as if it were a poisonous snake. The humiliation was complete. The maid's daughter had destroyed his career, his reputation, and his arrogance in a single masterful move. This isn't over, he muttered, handing over the keys with trembling hands. For you, it's over, Leticia replied calmly. For me, it's just beginning. Chinny approached her. I have a question. How did you know I would be here today? Leticia smiled. I didn't know, Mr. Chinny, but I've been preparing for any opportunity that might arise for 3 years. I studied not only Mandarin, but Japanese, Korean, and Arabic as well. Because opportunities favor prepared minds. And the app, when was it developed? I finished it last week. I hadn't even presented it to the university yet. Chinny laughed in admiration. You turned years of humiliation into fuel for excellence. That is true intelligence. Ricardo left the room like a ghost, carrying only his shattered dignity and an uncertain future. Outside, he heard the negotiations continue without him. He heard Chinny close $1 million deals with a company where he had worked for 8 years, but now mediated by the young woman he had completely underestimated. Alone in the hallway, Ricardo finally understood the lesson that had cost him his career. Never underestimate someone who is hungrier for success than you are sure of your superiority. 6 months later, Leticia was in her office on the 20th floor, now serving as Vice President of International Relations at Thomson Enterprises. Her first decision as an executive had been to hire Carmen as a quality supervisor, with a salary 3 times higher than what she had earned as an employee. Chinny became not only a business partner, but also a personal mentor. Leticia's app had already been licensed to 15 multinational companies, generating an annual income of $3 million. She used part of the money to open a free language school in underprivileged communities. Competence has no color, age, or surname, she said in her corporate lectures. It only has results. Ricardo, on the other hand, was facing his new reality. Fired without a letter of recommendation, he struggled to find work. His arrogance had become an urban legend in the Los Angeles executive market. Businesspeople shared the story as an example of how prejudice can destroy careers. One Thursday afternoon, he showed up at Thomson Enterprises and waited in the reception area. Leticia came down personally to greet him. I came to ask for an opportunity, he said, his eyes cast downward. Anything. I've learned my lesson. Leticia looked at him for a moment. Ricardo, I've learned that second chances are earned, not asked for. When you prove that you've really changed, maybe the market will give you a new opportunity, but that's not up to me. He left with his head down, carrying the bitterness of someone who finally understood that humiliating others is the quickest way to humiliate yourself. Carmen, now respected and valued, smiled as she watched her daughter transform not only their own lives, but also positively influence dozens of young people who attended the language school. Mom, Leticia said one Sunday night, thank you for teaching me that dignity is not negotiable, even when the world tries to convince us otherwise. The best revenge was not to destroy Ricardo, but to build something greater than he could ever imagine. Leticia proved that when competence meets opportunity, neither prejudice nor arrogance can stand in the way of success. In the end, Ricardo tried to humiliate a family, but ended up humiliating only himself. Leticia and Carmen learned that true victory is not about putting down those who have hurt us, but about rising so high that they become irrelevant.